Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for the great turnout. Thanks to those who came to breakfast. My name is John Bristow. I'm going to briefly introduce myself. I've been a geologist and a geochemist for most of my career. I graduated from University of Natal, PhD at UCT, and then we had 2 wonderful years in the United States on a postdoc in New Mexico and Albuquerque looking at modern volcanics. I spent 12 years with De Beers, and I'm grateful for that experience that I had. And then back in those days, De Beers worked all over the world, so I got wonderful experience. And then in 1994, at the change of politics, I left and set up my own business, and again, carried on mostly in the diamond space and had lots of fun. I'm going to talk today about our West Coast diamond deposits. 2025, this year is the centenary of that whole industry that started 100 years ago. And that's what I'm going to cover. I've got to cover 100 years of history in 45 minutes, so bear with me. I can't talk about everyone. There are going to be people I left out. Fortunately, in this room too are some of the people who worked on the West Coast, and I'll show you some pictures. And I'm sure they can add corrections and have inputs later on. So that's it. So what I'm going to do in terms of general structures, talk a bit about the history, and it's fascinating. And the one thing I want to say about, the geologists and non-geologists who started this business back 100 years ago was the quality of the people, their absolute passion, their dedication, and the conditions that they worked under then. There were no modern tar roads to Port Nolloth and Alexander Bay. There was plenty of wild animals back in those days, and the early prospectors and then the technocrats did an absolutely amazing job, and I'll try and show you some of that. So I'll talk about the pioneers, the legends, more sort of our vintage, the divers, the tough guys that did the hard work, some of the R&D, and then today's situation. Right, let's go. So this is what I'm going to try and summarize, and you don't have to read all that. You're also most welcome to the presentation. It will be on YouTube, so you can look at it again. But if anyone wants to go through the detail, and there's a lot of it, please let us know, and we'll gladly share the presentation. Okay. So just to start, that's a map that shows you where we're effectively going to be. And I'm going to focus on really the northern part of Namaqualand. And you'll see there the 2 obvious names that will come up regularly: Alexander Bay, Port Nolloth, Kleinzee. Ronnie Hazel in the audience today worked there with De Beers, so we can talk to him. And then this 400 kilometers of effective real world-class alluvial deposits, one of the world's biggest diamond plazas. This is the plaza in the South African side. The other plaza is obviously the one that extends onwards into southern Namibia. And they really were exceptional deposits. And you'll see on the left-hand side a wonderful diagram map which shows the whole coastline. It's not very clear, but that shows the 400 kilometers from Alexander Bay down to the Olifants River, and then north of South Africa, the west coast, all the way up through Walvis Bay, and so on. So that's just the setting. To orientate ourselves, that's the magnificent Orange River mouth, and of course the golf course on the right-hand side, the Arrondiment Golf Course. And so that's sort of a reference point as we go forward. This is an interesting satellite photograph, or satellite image shown of effectively northern Namaqualand on the right-hand side, and lots of sand cover, and then the Orange River, which goes in that big loop north and then comes back down south and goes up to Uppington and the falls and so on. And just the most fascinating river. Some of you will have obviously been there, walked it, etc. And then there's that magnificent sand sea as you go into the Namibian side. The other very interesting point about that diagram, surprisingly, it must have been taken after a rainy period or wet period up country, whereas you can see a big dirty plume of water into the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see how that plume is being pushed northwards by the Benguela current. And that Benguela current played a big role in the distribution of the diamonds up our west coast as well. Okay, just a geological summary of what we're talking about. On the left-hand side is a plan, a surface image of southern Africa. The black dots, and we really should have color-coded it, but the black dots are effectively kimberlites. Those kimberlites on craton within that big red outline will be generally diamondiferous, not necessarily economic, but have a smattering of diamonds. And then you'll notice there are a lot of black dots off that cratonic area out into what we call the mobile belt, Natal, Namakwa, Bushmaland, and so on. Those are generally olivine melilitites and some kimberlites, but they don't, very rarely do they have the odd diamond. So on craton would be diamondiferous rocks, off craton will be non-diamondiferous rocks. Okay, and then the other critical thing there are those two big dotted blue lines. There were two large drainages going back sort of into the late Cretaceous and then into the Tertiary, which were effectively working their way back into center of South Africa and eroding those kimberlites, releasing diamonds and carrying them to the west coast. And if anyone again wants information and the research and the data on all this history, there's some fascinating images, presentations, publications, people that we all know, Ian Corbett, Professor Bluck, Mike DeWitt, John Ward, and many others. So this whole history is extremely well documented with lots of really excellent papers. And the one thing we have to all, particularly us that worked for De Beers back then, was the amount of research, practical research that De Beers supported. Many, the names I mentioned, Mike DeWitt, John Ward, and that got really good PhDs or did research work in that period supported by De Beers. And so we were very fortunate in that respect. And we had a great boss called Barry Hawthorne who encouraged that. Okay, so that's the look from the top at Southern Africa. And then you'll see the two big plazas that are referred to there, the Namaqualand Plaza. So that was the plaza that formed by diamonds going down the original Proto-Orange River and heading effectively to the Olifants River mouth. And then when they got there, they were distributed up the coastline by that Benguela current on old beaches. And then equally to the north, and that modern day Orange River has been ongoing for much longer. It was again diamonds being taken down to the mouth of the Orange River and dispersed then up north, up the Namibian coastline. And bear in mind, the Orange River starts in Lesotho. Most of you will have been probably to the headwaters, 2,100 kilometers away. And the other big important drainage was the Vaal River, which actually starts on our eastern border almost, up in the eastern escarpment of the old Transvaal. So that river has been, again, a massive conveyor belt, scavenging diamonds, carrying them to the west coast. And there's the cross section, a simple cross section on the right, showing the interior of the country, obviously higher up, and it's been eroded. You can see the uplift and erosion of the kimberlites. We then had some deposition of diamondiferous gravels along many of our rivers, particularly the Vaal and Orange, and then out to sea, where you see there the deposition. So that's just a simplistic geological setting for you. Let's keep going. Just getting more technical, that's on the left-hand side there is the map of the marine diamond concessions on our west coast. So if you want to go and apply for a concession, there's normally a process you would go through to apply and register your concession. All of those concessions now, that goes back many, many years, are pretty well known. There's some or other sampling, prospecting having been done in them. And then importantly, on the right-hand side, is the sort of cross-section of how those concessions look in terms of there's the beach, there's the very shallow water, and then there's an A concession, a B concession, and a C concession. And the sort of the controlling factor or depth today is effectively 100 meters. De Beers, or not De Beers, or Namdeb, and the Namibian companies are mining diamonds at 100 meters on the very big smear of gravel that has been transported down the Orange River and then distributed north into Namibian waters. The concession one, the Atlantic one concession, is an amazing concession. And that's where, if you go through Cape Town once in a while, you'll see the big orange De Beers, their marine boats being fitted out or being serviced in Cape Town Harbour. And they are mining diamonds off the seabed at 100 meters. The coastline further down, the geology is very different. And most of the activity is generally shallower with smaller boats or mid-tier boats, but we'll talk to that. Okay, this is a summary of our West Coast diamond production up until today. Pretty cool. On the right-hand side is a image of diamonds from Alex Core in 2018. And the first thing you'll see there is the color and the quality. That's classic West Coast diamonds. Back then, 2018, the prices were still good, and you were probably looking at an average price for those of something like $500 to $600 a carat, run of mine. And they're very decent white stones. What the cutters called makeable. They're easy to cut, and it's really top quality material. There's some bigger stones in there. You do find 2 carats, and occasionally, I think the biggest diamond at the Orange River mouth has been about 160 carats. I stand corrected, but it's that sort of order. If you look at the work done on estimates of the diamonds that got weathered off the top of our craton, South Africa, in the interior, carried down the big rivers, the big conveyor belts, got to the West Coast, it's effectively billions of carats. It's quite phenomenal. And there's a lot of good work being done about that process whereby those diamonds are liberated and transported. And then the carats mined, the estimates, number of us have done estimates. Gabby Schneider, a very good geologist in Namibia, Mike DeWitt, who many of you will know, and myself. And if you take what's been mined, recovered, mined, sold, in both the Namibian waters, southern Namibia, and on our coastal strip, it's probably about 200 million carats of really top quality diamonds. It's very significant. One of the things we don't know, and I think most of you who worked in the diamond business know the problem, IDB, bicycle diamonds, fingers in the till, is a huge problem. And it's gone on since the earliest days of when these deposits were discovered in places like Port Nolloth. Okay, let's get into the pioneers. Fred Cornell, I'm sure some of you will probably have heard of him or read of him. There's a lovely book, or a couple of books and articles about Cornell. He was a consummate prospector in the Macqualand. And he always had the dream and the knowledge, so to speak, that there were diamonds in the Macqualand. But he never found them. But he was involved in some of the copper prospecting, looked for diamonds, and just the most amazing character and sort of typical of what we saw in the people that followed him. And then the guy that, or the family, or the person that really opened the door and showed the value of these diamonds is Jack Carstens. He was the son a storekeeper, and you'll see there in the bottom right-hand diagram, W. Carsten's, the shop in Port Nolloth way back when he was obviously growing up as a kid. And Port Nolloth at that stage was a harbor for shipping copper. Copper had been discovered in the Mackworland, O'Keefe and Springbok and those places quite some time before diamonds. And obviously they found the mines, they needed to export it. So the early exports were actually through Port Nolloth and under difficulties. And we'll talk a bit about that as well. And again, Jack Carstens wrote this wonderful book. If you see it on the secondhand bookshop, get it and read it. It's fantastic on his fortune through my fingers, and we'll see some of the diamonds he found along the way. Okay, and then interestingly, not to be sort of left out of the game, Hans Merensky, who was already well known and famous for the discovery of the PGMs in the bushveld, he also pitched up on the west coast, and he did some really good work with a group of prospectors, and you'll see in that table on the bottom right hand side there 465,000 carats of diamonds that came out of their prospecting team, and that was all from some very interesting high grade. We're going to show you the picture now. Diamond deposits, alluvial deposits between Port Nolloth and effectively Alexander Bay or the Orange River, and again very high quality diamonds, so he was the first real geologist, trained geologist, to go and look at these deposits. And interestingly, he was also the person who realized that there was suddenly going to be a huge supply and maybe a glut of diamonds from these deposits. And he went running off to talk to the then government and the opposition party at the time to say, we need to manage these things, bearing in mind that in the background, De Beers were already watching the situation. It's quite fascinating too, when you look at our history of diamonds in this country, De Beers and either Ernest Oppenheimer and later on Harry, there was always someone in the background, taking care of the cartel's interests as well. So they typical of De Beers, Anglo, they always had very good people out there looking after their interests. Okay, so this now is a really wonderful bit of geology done by Merensky and Wagner. Wagner, we'll all know, famous South African geologist, back already in 1928. And that's the diagram. There's a lovely article written by them. I have a copy if anyone wants to have a look at it. But you'll see that we write at the Orange River, and this is where those very high-grade deposits were discovered by Merensky and his prospecting team. And you'll see a whole lot of names in the middle of that diagram. I don't know how legible it is at the back there, but places like the Cliffs and the Oyster Trench. Merensky was of the view that, and these were high-level terraces. So in effect, the oldest terraces that hadn't yet been eroded. He was always of the view that there was a very close correlation between high-grade deposits and these oyster-rich beaches. And anyway, there's a lovely set of geological reports and documents done by people like Merensky and Wagner. And there's also a lovely book written about Merensky and his exploits in this country, right from the platinum deposits, the diamond deposits, and then obviously in the Eastern Transvaal, he was big into timber and all sorts of other industrial activities. Okay, so let's just keep moving. So now we get to sort of more recent times, Alexander Bay. I don't know how many of you know it, been there, spent time there. It's a sad, tired-looking place today, although every now and again it tries to resurrect itself. But it's one of the important little harbors that's also used for mining diamonds increasingly off the seabed. As the land side is now declining, there's far greater emphasis on the marine side, and we're going to talk to that as we go along. And typically, this is how the sea diamonds are mined. These are small converted fishing boats, and they will have a diver. There's a guy sitting on the back there. It says Peter Karpstad. That guy in a wetsuit is probably one of the divers coming back from a day's diving. Before we get to that, it's also just worth commenting on state alluvial diggings. So just to go back, what Merensky then did in his discussions with government is effectively highlighted that there were going to be all these diamonds coming out of the west coast or the northwest coast, and best that something be done about it. And the government at the time effectively said, okay, we're going to stop any prospecting and mining in state grounds or state land. And that's really how state alluvial diamonds came about. This government-owned diamond mining company that covers a long stretch of ground from Alexander Bay in the north of the mouth of the Orange River down to just south of Port Nolloth. And again, there's a wonderful book called Baie van Diamante, or Bay of Diamonds, written about that whole history of state alluvial diamonds by a very smart researcher at the University of Free State, Peter Kutzer, in their history department. And again, it's well worth the read. And we'll go through and look at some of the things that went on at Alex Court. I was very fortunate in 1972 to take part in a student geological congress to Namaqualand. We came to Cape Town. I was in Natal, came to Cape Town, drove up to Namaqualand, went through the O'Keefe copper mines, then went to Alex Bay, and these are the pictures. Then we went across the river to Arrondiment and got very well looked after there, and then went up to interior to Rosh Pina and places like this. But here we are. These are pictures taken in very close to the Alex Bay then mining complex 53 years ago. And you can see on the left-hand side there was a mining block, and they were stripping sand with big bulldozers and old dam scrapers to get down to the gravel layer. The middle picture shows an area in that same block where the sand has been stripped away, and you're now seeing bedrock, and you're starting to see these amazing gullies and foliation of the rock, which is very typical of the Natal Namakwa rocks in that part of the world. And you can imagine the sort of trap sites for diamonds that will be in those schistose, heavily foliated, heavily folded rocks. On the left-hand side of this diagram, and these are my images, and I was there, again, you can see they've now taken away most of the sand and the bedrock sweeping has started. You can see these amazing gullies. In this case, we're actually looking almost east to west, to a gully going out to sea. In the middle diagram is a pothole. And there are a whole lot of young students, colleagues. There were 4 of us from Natal University. Most of the guys at the bottom are from back then the University of Natal. And we picked up diamonds. It was amazing. We walked into the bottom of this gully and pothole, and we picked up diamonds out of the sand, and we handed them carefully to the security contingent that were watching us with tins. So we put these diamonds into the tin, and sadly we didn't pocket any of them. Okay, but that's in a sense how rich these places were, that you could walk around and pick up gemstone diamonds. And I don't know how many of you have been in a situation like this, or one of the gravel deposits, say in the Orange River. When you see these West Coast and Orange River diamonds, they look like real diamonds. They're not the cruddy crap that you get out of kimberlites. And they really hit you in the eye, and you can pick them up very quickly. So we picked them up, and then on the right-hand side is the late Professor Jay Barton. Erica, his wife, was still alive. He worked at the BPI, Bernard Price Institute, for many years in Johannesburg. And the bedrock sweepers, and you'll notice it was very unsophisticated then. So pickups of diamonds and putting a few in your pocket was a real factor. And nowadays, Ronnie will know better than me, but De Beers and everyone else invented and built these amazing vacuum cleaners where you basically vacuumed up the diamonds. Okay, so state alluvial diggings, again, there's a lot of good information. A lot of companies tried to do JVs with Alex Core. It never happened. But anyway, it was sort of considered as a strategic investment and area for the old government. And the first thing, and the important thing to notice on the right-hand side, that they between CDM on the Namibian side, Alex Core, Kleinzee, and I think the copper mines, Ronnie can correct me, also contributed. They set up amazing farms on the south bank of the Orange River. There were vineyards, there were ostrich farms, there was a piggery, a dairy, and all of those farms produced produce, fresh produce for, I think, south of Springbok, Springbok, and all the way into southern Namibia. So all of those towns and communities were fed by these farms. And sadly, if you go there today, in the new dispensation, those farms are a tragic state compared to what they were previously. And if you look at there, what government were effectively, the then government was doing for poor white South Africans, giving them employment and jobs and houses, it's something a new government has done a very poor job of emulating. Okay, right, then let's go now to the next generation of characters that made this business. And bear in mind here, I'm talking of the southern side of the system. I'm talking about the South African side. And there on the right-hand side is an amazing gentleman. I had the good fortune of working with him. He was a director of a company we had on the Orange River mining diamonds, Francois Hoffman, or Hoffy. He eventually became the chair of Transx Group, which back in the good old days was the second biggest company, diamond mining company after De Beers, but obviously a lot smaller. And Hoffy was a wonderful guy, and he got going with Sammy Collins, who was a Texan oil entrepreneur and effectively pioneered offshore diamond mining on boats. And there's a whole story in that, and we can do that in another presentation one day. Anyway, there's Hoffy. The best part about that I enjoy is, and Hoffy was a workaholic. He was a very good geologist, well-trained. But he notes there, and he was working for this, you call it Marine Diamond Corporation. And again, just look at the companies that started and purchased MDC. It was everyone else but Anglo and De Beers. Anglo and De Beers in those days still thought this was a risky game. So they let someone else do the hard work. And that's what people like Sammy Collins did with people like Francois Hoffman, a top geologist. So that was the hard work. And then when sort of Anglo De Beers, and I'm being a bit naughty, were comfortable that there was real value here, they stepped in and bought out MDC. And as we know, the rest is history, and Ronnie can tell us a bit about that background. But anyway, it's interesting to see that Hoffy say in my first year with MDC, I slept at home for a total of 40 days or nights. So when you worked in the Macroland, you didn't go 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. You just stayed there until you'd sort of met your targets and done what you had to do. And then another gentleman, and it sort of runs in the family, who did a lot of really good early work, particularly using the geophysics to map the seabed, was Andries or Anne Cornelissen. And some of you might have come across his sons in particular, Courtney, who's still very active on the West Coast, his brother Lawrence, who's more of the sort of finance guy behind him. And at one stage, their sister, Elizabeth, was also involved in the business too. So Anne Cornelissen also played a big role in liberating or doing the groundwork to develop these West Coast diamond deposits. He again, and it's interesting, back in his day, so he was born in 1934, and then he ended up with a degree or MSc in geophysics. But companies like O'Keefe Copper actually prospected for diamonds. They weren't just looking for base metals. And he went through several the smaller marine diamond companies, Terra Marine Mining. He then actually was recruited by Anglo De Beers and worked for them, and finally ended up in Dawn Diamonds, which was a well-known company back in the day, mining alluvial diamonds out of Port Nolloth on the seabed. And he and his company then played a big role in getting Letseng diamond mine reopened and reworking with Keith Whitelock. Many of you will know of Keith Whitelock. And Anna and his team went and mined and processed the alluvial or colluvial material that had been pushed off the top of Letseng in sort of early 1998, 1999, 2000. And where Brett Kevel had put up a lot of money to restart the operation. And they recovered some real big diamonds. That's what the old man, 435 carat from that same diamond. That's 2003. But they found 3 diamonds bigger than 100 carats, which really got Letseng going again. Okay. And carry on with this group. Some of you, or many of you, or some of you would have heard of Baxter-Brown, and he's still alive today. He's 90. He lives in Joburg, and he still goes down the Orange River to look at deposits. But again, an absolute legend, a great gentleman, and an immense wealth of knowledge when it came to alluvial diamonds on our west coast. And we can talk about him for hours, but we'll leave that for another day. And not only did he end up identifying most of the really important alluvial diamond deposits. Here's a map. This is the lower Orange River. This is just before it gets to the mouth of the Orange. And you might have to be careful that the sort of faint line, gray line, is the current day river. But that river, like any river over geological time, many millions of years, has meandered, cut off the meanders, and left gravel deposits behind. And so this section of the river, Barken, that's Barken Mine. Many of you would have heard of Barken or been there. Barken Mine on the top, bottom right-hand side. And the other famous mine was Ochta, where Christo Wiese made his first money. So that section of the river has produced some of the most amazing diamonds as well. There the size is bigger, 1.5 carats per stone. And that Barken mine really made transects down on the bottom right. Eugenia Clark, another wonderful geologist, very, very quiet, withdrawn person. He and Baxter-Brown were great mates. And I didn't point out, but Baxter started his career again with Anglo and De Beers at CDM on the West Coast, and he had 4 years there. And equally, if you read through this, Eugenia Clark, he was an English geologist. He too spent time at CDM. His first bosses were Darrell Hallam and Charles Stockton, 2 really iconic geologists at the time back then, working on that West Coast. And I'm sure Ronnie has got stories to tell about him. And Hugh again stuck up this friendship with Baxter. And the pair of them did this amazing work all the way through Namaqualand. They were more focused on the feeder rivers and the deposits they'd left behind coming from the interior of the country, the Orange, the Proto-Orange, the Biffles River, and various other drainages coming out of the hinterland. Okay, and then another great character, Dick Barker. And again, an absolute wealth of wisdom, entrepreneurship, smartness. He came from a digger's family, the 1700s digger family, and Dick had no formal training. He was a very poor, from a very poor family. Didn't even have much schooling, so to speak. Anyway, he had this amazing ability to understand gravels, understand these river systems. When I went to Kimberley and started De Beers in 1983, we were the geologists doing exploration, but we weren't allowed to really see diamonds, so that we couldn't, get our fingers in the till. And Dick Barker then was mining a little kimberlite called Makanyani out near Postmasburg. And I used to go and visit Dick, and he used to show me diamonds and pieces of kimberlite and all the work that he was doing. Just a wonderful character. And he has two sons, both of whom, like Cornelissen, ended up in the diamond business. And my thanks to Maurice Barker. He's kindly parted and passed on a lot of the information that I'm talking to here. And there are a couple of images. There's Maurice Barker on the left-hand side, Dick on the right-hand side. And Dick was a sort of guy who was always willing and very keen to partake of his knowledge. And it was the same of all of the ones that I knew. Francois Hoffman, Hoffy, Dick Barker, Hugh Jenner Clark, and so on. They were always willing to share. And many young De Beers geologists spent an awful lot of time visiting Dick to see what he was doing, why he was doing this, how he was mining on the Orange River, and just learning from that person who'd had no formal training, but through intuition, observation, and careful documentation had really worked out these deposits. So on the right, there's John Ward in the middle, and Mike DeWitt on the right. Many of you will have met them. Dick Barker looking very thoughtful, and on the back is Professor Brian Bluck. Professor Bluck also was a wonderful sedimentologist, and he also did a lot of work in helping to unravel the history of the Orange River and the feeding of that system into the marine deposits. And then the one that I'm sure we've all heard of, one way or the other, it was Christo Wiese, not to be outdone. Christo actually made his first money at Ochta Diamonds. And Ochta Diamonds was a deposit at the top end of that map I showed you, where you had Barkin on the bottom right-hand side. It was a super rich plunge pool in the Orange River. And a young guy, Johan de Villiers, who was doing the audit for Ochta Mine, he had the option, or he ended up being able to purchase it. He went to Christo and persuaded Christo to put up the money. Christo put up 50%. It was 3 million rand, a lot of money in those days. Anyway, Christo ended up sticking it out, and already then he showed very good timing in terms of when to get in and get out of deals. And he ended up with Ochta and doing pretty well out of it. Johan de Villiers ran off to the States, and there's lots of stories about diamonds being flown out of Ochta and in tin drums. Some of it embellished, but it was quite a story as well. Okay, so let's move on, and then we get to the individual that many of us, particularly the students and the others around here, would have known, Professor John Gurney. John was not to be outdone here as well. John was a very smart academic, but he was a fantastic soccer player. He grew up in the UK. I think he might have ended up, if he'd stayed there, playing for Liverpool, or so he said. He was a passionate diver and a very good sportsman and a very good scientist. So John had dived for diamonds, particularly at places like the Pint at the Orange River mouth. He was a close associate or friend of Colin Walker's, who Colin also ended up in that West Coast diamond business. And John put together a company called Benko, and he had got BHP Billiton to actually back him at one stage when they were still looking at Africa and looking at diamonds. And he developed this venture and did a JV with Moonstone Diamonds. At the time, I was a director on Moonstone, and he persuaded Moonstone to help him raise money. And Moonstone raised $10 million from an Arab sheikh, a Bahraini sheikh. And that vessel on the right-hand side was built with that $10 million. And we then used that vessel to go prospecting and mining, and that was the problem. We didn't have other boats and exploration means to explore and delineate ahead of ourselves. So you were trying to do two things with one vessel. and it caught up with us. And at the end of the day, that boat was decommissioned in 2001, and to be perfectly honest, we lost $10 million into the sea. But there's the Moonstar vessel, mining at sea in 2B, which is sort of off Alex Core. And there's the derricks and the pulleys that got the mining head onto the seafloor, and a picture of the mining head using airlift technology. Now, airlift technology is incredibly simple and quite efficient, but one of the problems we had on the south side of the Orange River, down off that west coast of South Africa, was being able to really clean the seabed properly to recover the diamonds. And that goes back to that earlier geology I showed you, where you had those incredible gullies and foliation, and diamonds fall into those cracks. So, you can get down there and sweep them up or pick them up, but when you're using a tool undersea at probably 30, 40 meters and you can't see what it's doing, it turned out to be rather inefficient. Obviously, today, the technology that De Beers and others are using is far more efficient. So that was, sort of rudimentary stuff being used back then. It worked, found diamonds, but we couldn't make it pay. So eventually, that vessel was decommissioned. The other thing, too, it wasn't the perfect vessel. As we found out, it was a riveted hull. And a riveted hull with all that equipment on it, you can see there were shakers and screens and plant and a lot of vibration. So you had a lot of leaks springing in that hole, and there was regular problems, welding up the hole and keeping the water out. So it was fun. Okay, let's go to Port Nolloth and come get to the divers, and I've got to keep going. So this is now Port Nolloth, 140 kilometers north of a Springbok, and a colorful town, place you must go and visit at least once in your life if you're going to be a diamond geologist. Typical, again, the fishing boats there. And one thing just to look at, we're going to talk about divers, but an important consideration on the West Coast is sea days. If you're going on a little boat and getting into that water in the West Coast, and the southwest, the northwest is blown, and the swells are 3 and 4 and maybe 5 meters, you're not going to go diving. So sea days are incredibly short. So when you get a good sea day out there, you've really got to go and get in the water and work hard. And very interestingly, way back, you'll see that 2003, lots of sea days, mainly because that they were still finding diamonds very close to Port Nolloth. You didn't have to go too far afield. And then you saw the big drop off, and then as the technology got better, it's picked up sort of later on. But sea days, getting in the water to dive is a big challenge. This is the old Port Nolloth. This was the copper export harbor. And you can see, how basic it was back then. The raw Phyke, or the way they made their roads. The quay was very, very basic. The quay where they loaded the copper, it was a copper port. And then see the way you got taken off a vessel and put in a basket and brought to shore. Okay, so now we're talking diamond divers. There's a picture on the left of a fairly big boat, a catamaran, and you can see a diamond diver jumping overboard in very calm water. And you can see the work that you then have to do. So this will be, 5, maybe 10 meters of water. You people will know that the amount of time you can stay down at that depth is not long, and you've got to really work hard. So the guys have got big suction machines connected to the pumps on deck, and use a crowbar, because a lot of the diamonds, you've got to move rocks out of potholes. So it's real physical hard work, but it pays. And very interestingly, for those of you who live in the Overstrand, there are 3 characters around here who were very successful diamond divers. So one of them is Peter Hodgkinson, famously known as Dizzy, who is a great environmentalist and spends his life cleaning and hacking invasive trees, typically up a mountain where he's got to hang off ropes with a chainsaw on his back there. Amazing character. And then Brian McFarlane, a very well-known character. He's even mentioned in some of the scientific articles written by people like John Gurney and that about the West Coast diamonds. He was a super smart diver. And then the other one, fascinating guy, is Wilfred Schibel of Gansbaai, the Penguin Sanctuary, the the shark diving, marine cruises, and again, a larger than life character like all of these guys, and mined diamonds as a diver off the seabed. There's Port Nolloth back in the 70s and 80s when these guys didn't have to go too far to sea and they were recovering lots of quality diamonds. The left-hand side there's late in the day, divers coming in from boats and being shipped to shore. And there's a young Peter Dizzy kitting up for a dive. And on the top right-hand side is a parcel of diamonds that he had recovered off the seabed. So again, the quality, as you see there, and the size was exceptional. This is a very well-known character. I don't know how many of you came across him if you went to another George Moyes. He was a legend in the town and sort of ran the museum. And like all of those characters, incredibly colorful. He could tell you what he'd done and where he'd done it and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now it gets interesting. Let's move on to the R&D, research and development. Professor Eric Simpson, marine geology, an old professor at UCT. And back then we had a really smart geological survey, marine geology unit. John Rogers, the young John Rogers is there on the left-hand side. Bob De Decker and Mike Woodburn, who ended up setting up a company called Marine and Coastal, and they did a lot of work for the Moonstone venture. And here was this whole department, which doesn't exist anymore, of marine geologists and the research and technical stuff. And this was back in the 1990s. Sorry, I see I've still got question marks there. Okay, and here we have a very interesting and a very youthful Andre Duplessis. Stick up your hand, Andre, where are you? Yeah, there he is at the back. And I see you were actually doing physical work in those days. Yeah. So there's on the left is again Mike Woodburn, Bob De Decker, and their sort of diver training guy in the middle. And Andre and his colleague doing some hard work fixing up pieces of equipment on the right-hand side. How old were you then, yeah, Andre? Okay. And again, a lot of this was R&D work, mapping the seabed, doing side scan sonar work, trying to map out where the best gravel patches were, where the sand cover wasn't too thick. And asked the guys about that boat. It was a great vessel for doing research out at sea, but it was extremely uncomfortable for personnel because, again, the picture's taken obviously in a very calm water, but it's very seldom that West Coast ocean actually looks that calm. Okay, just moving on now, and we need to start wrapping up. We've talked about the diving on the West Coast and the Orange River. Obviously not to be outdone, De Beers were involved there from the very early years. Kleinzee was also a deposit identified right from sort of 1926, 27. And it was a big river system, alluvial system associated with the Buffles River, which was again one of these rivers that had run off the interior, carried diamonds, deposited them on the old beaches and at sea. And De Beers, as they would, had a really smart, big operation, and they used these, or used this, they only had one, but it did an amazing job, this big drag line, to strip thick cover very efficiently. And we flew over it on one of our trips to Alex Bay to get onto the Moon Star. And you could see this big drag line working, and the paddocks that they were stripping there in the bottom left. And exposing the gravel and moving the sand. And then as they moved through those blocks, they would obviously rehabilitate, smooth the sand cover back behind them and did really smart rehabilitation work. Just interestingly, on Alex Core, there were along the way a number of efforts to try and privatize it and prolong the life of the land deposits. There was an effort in 1997 which didn't work out. We at Moonstone actually had a look at it. And then subsequently, in the early 2000s, De Beers again, prior to this, because Kleinzee's ore body eventually ran out and they shut down. Along the way, very, very smart geologist Graham Wheelock, John Hughes, an executive of Anglo De Beers, had lengthy discussions. I was involved in some of them with Alex Core to try and form some sort of joint venture whereby this technology or this equipment could be used on the southern parts of Alex Core where the soil cover, sand cover was again much thicker. In the north, it was easy. The cover on the old beach deposits and that was, max a couple of meters. As you got further south, it was 10 and 15 meters, and here you had the equipment to go and strip it. Anyway, sadly, that never happened, mostly for political reasons. So where do we get to today? Well, Kleinzee, the future, is really gone. And Kleinzee eventually shut down. In 2009, you'll see there the payable resources were exhausted. In 2013, they started changing the old Kleinzee mine town into an open town. And no sooner had they done that than our scourge of illegal mining, zamas, informal mining, whatever you want to call it, started on the West Coast as well. And it's been, unfortunately, a massive problem. And, we can discuss that at length, but these are just some pictures of examples of this informal mining going on the right. There is a move afoot today to sort of resurrect some of those small towns. There's great tourism opportunities there, so that's happening. But if you look at the legacies, these again are two shots of effectively informal miners. The joblessness in the Macqualand is huge, like the rest of the country for that matter. And it's a problem. And in places at times you find hundreds and thousands of illegal miners mining old dumps, digging adits and holes into these old dumps and getting at gravel that's still in situ. Obviously, any company, whether it's Alex Core or De Beers, has a cutoff grade. And so you do leave old areas. If you're an informal miner, obviously, just finding a diamond every couple of days can feed you for weeks. So that's the challenge we face, and we've all been aware of what's gone on at Stilfontein recently. Okay, then the world of IDB, how to steal a diamond. And I'm sure you've all heard some or other story about stealing a diamond, including Paul Simon and diamonds on the soles of her shoes. And that used to be one of the methods used, is to stick diamonds in your soles so that when you walked out through security, they didn't see them, they didn't get in the X-ray beam. And there's a lot of folklore and great stories about IDB, and way back, in the early days of diamond discoveries, Frickie Mostert, the Mostert family were huge in the Macqualand, and you see that second comment there, paragraph, God put the diamonds here and he put nothing else. Well, in a sense, that's true of the Macqualand. People here think the diamonds belong to them. So, it was my right to go and prospect and mine and steal diamonds. A consequence of that, you can imagine the technology that's been developed over the years by all the companies, hands-off technology. Ironically, there was never hands-off technology because people are ingenious, and it's just amazing what lengths they go to steal diamonds. I don't have to tell you all that. Scanx was one of their great successes. It's a wonderful machine. Many of you will walk through it when you go through modern airports. These big, it's like a cylinder, and you walk into it and it gives you a full body scan. I think a lot of it's psychology, but it's been very successful in security everywhere and in the medical business. So there's a lot of spin-offs from the things that a company like De Beers does. And then this is the classic. It was all over the newspaper for years, using pigeons to strap diamonds to them and then let them fly out, to where you'd brought them from, and then you'd pick up the pigeon or shoot it, sadly, and recover the diamonds. So as I say, if you want to know more about it, go and read Matthew Hart. Matthew's written a lot about the diamond industry, Canada and everywhere else. and he's quite a light-hearted and amusing writer. Just some of the, the positives and the natural beauty in that part of the world. And I think that's where we as geologists have been extremely fortunate. We've been able to go to remote places that many ordinary citizens will never get to. And I've certainly been part of that the backwoods of Russia, Northwest Territories of Canada, and places like Namaqualand, Orange River mouth on the top right with the flamingos. So thank you. That's my presentation. Thanks for your patience. There's a lot of people I have to acknowledge. There's a list. I'm not going to talk about it now. And there's a great list of references. I've been fortunate, as I said, to come across an immense amount of information. It's amazing what you can find on Mr. Google, and some incredible, articles going back to the day. Articles by people like George Beets, who was a consultant to Ernest Oppenheimer. And when you go back and read through that information, those old timers, old geologists, old prospectors really didn't miss a trick. Their powers of observation and documentation, there were no smart cameras, no drones, no satellite images, but they really didn't miss much when you look at what they achieved. So thanks very much, and happy to share this. So Hazel, stand up, please, and introduce yourself. And tell us your CV. Tell us your CV. Tell us your CV.
I just want to say you've done a brilliant job, John. I think the research, you must have put a huge amount of work into this. You have brought to life this piece of history that is so important in so many lives, certainly in mine. It's a massive piece of my life. And you brought it back, and you've triggered memories in my mind with all those names and people that I'd forgotten about completely. I think you did a brilliant job. Well done. I really thought it was great. I feel guilty about my time on the West Coast. You look at those holes there. I remember once I went down the coast with a fellow called Dr. Robinson from Kleinzee, where I lived for about 5 years. And he later became chief of the Parks Board in South Africa. And we were camping down the coast, and he said to me, Ronnie, he was sitting having a beer with me in London Drive. He said, Ronnie, what is your epitaph going to say when you die one day? He said, well, here lies Ronnie Hazel, who spent his life digging trenches on the West Coast, never filling them in, leaving this awful mess that will be there forever. And it's true, we left a hell of a mess. And he said, his epitaph would be, here's Turkey Robinson, who spent his life trying to preserve the ecology of the wildlife and everything. So I really feel quite guilty. But at the same time, I look back on things that mean so much to so many people. And having spent a lot of time in Namibia and knowing that coast quite well, and there was an awful lot left behind by the Germans as well. And when you look at the tourist potential of the area now, so many tourists go there to look at the remains of the diamond industry. They love to go to the old Coleman's Court places. They love to go to ghost towns, and it brings in thousands of tourists every year, I think, to those areas. So there are some benefits, but we, as geologists, we didn't actually have a very good legacy on the coast. We made a lot of mess. Anyway, John, that's about me. You did a brilliant job. You, as I say, you evoked so many memories, people that I've forgotten, brought them back to life again. So well done.